Okay, so for my blog this week, I guess I want to talk about the article we were reading specifically for the blog about messiness in education. And first, I really like the article. It talked about an element of education that, I think a lot of teachers are uncomfortable with, especially in K through 12, where behavior is a constant issue in class, and any sense of messiness can lead to chaos with behavior, which isn't so much the case maybe at the college level. So I just want to talk about a few things that the article was talking about that I had a comment on. So really the first one was, there was a quote towards the beginning where the writers are talking about the politics of complexity reduction, which I guess they're talking about how this is kind of a common thing that technology can do, can help take complex things and reduce them into tasks or smaller chunks, or whatever it is that we decide we want to do by taking something, breaking it up, making it smaller. And technology can help us do that in a lot of ways, and maybe in ways that you can't do it as well, in a face-to-face environment. And so they were just talking about all these different marketing. It's really about complexity reduction. And so I just think to myself, what's wrong with complexity? I mean, I get that not all students can process through complex topics on their own, but that's literally that is what we do in class. We learn how to break down complex issues. And I don't know that technology can do that as well as a human. Because I don't know how sensitive technologies can be to the student. I mean, honestly. But anyway, I just wonder, why do we want to avoid complexity? Why is that the big marketing pull? Because once we remove the difficulty in complex issues or topics or whatever content, what's the job of the teacher? I mean, really. And maybe that's why they're talking about this. Well, I don't know if that's what they're talking about this, but definitely it makes me think about the teachers I work with. And if we replace the teacher as the one guiding through complex situations for students, if we replace that with technology, then teachers ultimately don't really know what they're supposed to do for themselves in that environment. And honestly, that leads to some other specific quotes from the article that really made me think about the teachers I work with today, including myself. And I work in a high school. I teach freshmen English, and I worked with several different kinds of teachers at different kinds of schools. And so anyway, so ultimately this article, says, there's a quote that says, in each section we argue for messier forms of thinking and practicing and suggest possible approaches to work with complexity and not yetness in productive ways. And me reading that, I'm awesome, because I'm constantly thinking about just the complexity of what I try to do every day. And probably every teacher feels like that, but specific to the English classroom, I mean, we're dealing with, basic reading skills, and I don't feel like I should be, but yet I am dealing with basic reading skills on top of trying to teach them to read critically. So there's that level of analysis. And then we're talking about, nonfiction versus fiction. and like how we approach fiction versus how we approach nonfiction with a critical eye. And then to compound that, we're also doing vocabulary and context. And these are students who do not have a wide vocabulary. I have dual language speakers, so vocabulary, like basic vocabulary, is a problem sometimes. And then we are also dealing with the writing aspect in the English classroom, which is grammar and revising and editing. And we're just like supposed to cover all of those things in 1 week, or I don't know I don't know these days, but there is like just like levels of complexity, and with technology coming in, it's one more layer of complexity because we're dealing with technology skills and troubleshooting with internet and software programs, and I mean just dropping the computers, and like so like technology in and of itself provides another level of messiness. But what I really think about this issue of messiness is like, in my class, it's real. And I really do train my students to be ready for the day where I'm like, man, I don't know how to fix that. Or, what do you think? I have no idea. Or, I mean, and I'm comfortable with this approach. But I think messiness is really difficult for a lot of educators, especially the educators who are predominantly trained and currently practice traditional forms of teaching. They're the ones who really embrace the teacher-centered model of teaching, where the educator has like complete control. Like the whole classroom revolves around the teacher and ultimately is the expert on whatever they're doing. So then with the emergence of technology, this really screws with that dynamic, because now students have access to all kinds of information, all kinds of new experts, and some of that's just, bloggers who have an opinion, but not necessarily based on evidence. And then there's also legitimate access to information. And so for teachers who are in the traditional model, honestly, I don't think they know how to get out of it, and ultimately they're not comfortable with messiness, because like messiness means there's no control. Messiness means like they're not the expert, they're not the center of the world, they're not the great dictator of their own classroom. So obviously, I kind of look down on that, but I get it. Like I get the lack of control. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, but that is how I think maybe it's perceived. And so like once teachers try to integrate technology, I mean, really the information highway will usurp the power of the teacher. So for a lot of traditional teachers, this is it's too difficult to overcome, because they're not really being trained to do something else. And so that makes me go, okay, well, what's this something else? If we are no longer the center of the class, if we are no longer the only expert, if we are no longer the entertainment in some ways, like if it's not us, then what do we do? What are we doing with students? How are we helping them break down the complexity of issues, and not whatever we're doing in class is not ruined by what's going on out there, with other experts. So, I mean, this really leads me to think about, and we've got all these great ideas about how to do this and how to integrate technology, and I'm on board with trying stuff out. I'm on board with the messiness, but I don't think that I'm in the majority. And when we're dealing with teachers who are in the classroom face to face 5 days a week, 187 days a year, they can't be messy every day. It really can't be like that. I mean, it's exhausting, because messiness means chaos. And so I like the theory in the article, but it really makes me go, who is redefining the role of the teacher? If we are handing over some of the control and letting it be messy so that we've got room to figure it out and see what works and see what doesn't, if we're really doing that, what is our role now? And I'm comfortable with discovering that and letting it change from day to day depending on what we're doing, but not all teachers are. In fact, I would say a lot, like a majority, are not comfortable with allowing the situation to redefine their role. So we need some research to say, well, what is our role as a teacher when technology is integrated? If we're not in the face-to-face, I mean, that can be a purely online environment, but it can also be blended. So I think if we start to help redefine our roles as educators in a technology world, I think that is when our traditional educators will find a way to be comfortable in the messiness of just the complexity of online learning and digital integration and all that stuff. Anyway, thanks for listening.